All right, folks, and welcome back to Podcast for the Politically Homeless. Today, we're here to discuss the societal impacts of social media. I'm your host, Stren.
And I'm Zeph. In 2025, social media is more than just a pastime. It's a place we commit ourselves, we give our hearts and souls, and it raises more and more questions each day about mental health, constant use, and its effects on young people.
There's quite a lot to cover in this topic today. Over the course of how long I've known social media for, and I think it's the same for Zeph, it's evolved a great deal. All the elements, all the positives and the negatives have very much evolved over that course of time.
I know that we were talking just before today's recording and recalling some of our own earlier social media experiences, and you'd said just before we were recording about Bebo. I remember my older brother trolled me using a girl I'd met on Bebo, and I was almost convinced I was going to get murdered because I didn't quite understand the implications of giving my address out on the internet. We've come full circle where we used to say, don't trust strangers, and like, you know, be careful who you speak to online, and now things like dating's done online. Younger people are online more and more each day. It's kind of come full circle where now you're only meeting people online.
I know it pretty much. It has been a full turnaround in relation to how much we embrace and adopt and promote that kind of like just throwing yourself out there into the world unknown. Back when I was younger, certainly social media wasn't a thing. My first chat room, I think, in the very early days, like I say, was like MSN Messenger, where the worst thing you could expect was getting overly nudged, potentially at times. But the thing about Bebo, I actually had forgot all about that until you'd mentioned another few, and I was thinking back to what was the first social media platform that I seen, and yeah, it was Bebo back in the early day. But I was very much a latecomer to social media, to be honest.
As it's progressed more, it went from that Bebo like MySpace, tell a story about yourself kind of thing, to almost like fixation, a religion for some people. I know I left Twitter, now X, but will always in my heart be Twitter, in 2022. And I think for the year and a half before that point, I'd wake up, and before I'd done anything else, it would be straight over, check analytics, how was it doing? I'd be on Twitter before my feet had touched the floor, and I was obsessed with those numbers. You know, do people like me? Do people like the content I'm putting out? Is, you know, like, are people being positive about it? Are people being negative about it? What was those reactions? How can I build on that? And that was all before I'd really processed the morning. Afterwards, it almost felt liberating to leave and not worry about those numbers.
Obviously, we're here talking about the kind of benefits or the impacts or harms that social media does. You know, there's a lot of benefits to it, but there are a lot of harms, and that's one of them, because that is effectively a mental health impact there. You know, the whole fear of missing out starts to build in people, you know, when there's so much happening that's happening in other places that you can't see it directly or go along and get involved. Yeah, the fear of missing out thing definitely became quite large. A whole culture there that can really fuel anxiety and low self-esteem in general. You know, again, I heard a phrase used for the very first time a couple of weeks ago when it was talking about social anxiety and social isolation. And again, the new thing is social media anxiety and social media isolation, because for some people, that's where so much of their socializing takes place. For some, it's like you said, it's the only place it takes place. And that's a very different world from certainly the one I grew up in when I was that age. You know, it's like your friends were the people that lived in your street. Much simpler time.
I think I agree. Like, I was saying this just last week to somebody. There was a point in time where checking if your friend was available to do things meant physically going and knocking on somebody's door and saying, are you available to do things?
Or shouting at his mum while she's putting the washing out.
Yeah, shouting at his mum while she's putting the washing out is another good example, right? Or your mum would shout you back in, or there'd be some kind of stringent come in when the street lights are on kind of thing. Whereas now, children all connect with their peers and contact their peers via instant messaging platforms, and then sit on the internet doing things all day. You know, there's no like climbing trees or... Oh, and I sound like an old man. Like, I'm in my mid-30s for context, so, you know, I may sound old manish saying things like climbing trees, but this wasn't that long ago that was the norm, where, you know, you'd go out, you'd get scrapes on your knees, you'd come back, your parents wouldn't ask any questions. and it was like, as long as you were alive and okay, you didn't really need social media. You were on your own adventures and being social with the kids on the street, like you say, or the next street over, or the ones you went to school with, and then you just vanish off for hours at a time without the need to connect to some kind of digital portal to check statistics.
I know the level of entertainment value associated with some of the things that we used to manage to entertain us for a whole day or sometimes a whole weekend, just in the woods or in the fields, and you had some sticks and some string, and out of that, you could build a whole fort, and all sorts. Keep yourself busy all weekend. And imagine taking kids from today with their mobile phones and social media accounts and taking all those away. You just drop them in the middle of 1980s growing up in the UK, where your best pastime that you can hope for is getting out to play in the woods for 2 hours. And that's it. No devices, no social media, no games, no consoles, none of that. Just away out you go and play.
Or bike rides.
Yeah.
Bike rides were a thing in the 90s that every child did,
Yeah.
like 80s, early 90s. You'd knock, you'd you could sometimes get the door knocked, and you'd be in for an exciting time, right? Like one kid knocks on your door, there's another 14 on push bikes at the end of the path, trying to show respect to your parents. It's like, yeah, it's time. But now that, like I say, it's now you're seeing 5-year-olds getting, like a 5-to-1 kill death ratio on Call of Duty instead of going on a bike ride or instead of going out to the woods. In actual fact, a 2024 PEW study found that nearly half of all US teens say they're online almost consistently.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Some people, because of its scale and because of, I suppose, a sense of anonymity that sits behind it to some degree as well, a lot of people actually feel safer in that much larger space than they do in the small, more localized space around them. And it's a bit of a strange phenomenon, I think, that, some people actually find themselves in a safer bubble online and in social media spaces than they do in the real world around them. But I was just going to say as well, the whole thing around social media and its availability, whether it's to people day to day or to children, I suppose, the access part is the device market of today. And you mentioned something there about gaming, the fact that social media is kind of in everything. Even if you're sitting down to play a game, there'll be some social aspect of it that you can have a chat during your game. You can be in a Discord server for your game, whatever that happens to be. Everything has a social media angle to it or channel associated with it, and it's almost difficult to get away from it.
And I agree, getting away from it, you raise a valid point there. We'll once again put ourselves back into our younger self shoes. When you were at school, if you had a problem with another child at school, it generally stayed at school, or, there was a chance you were going to bump into that child in the street and they might have given you a bit of act. It was generally sort of like a one-on-one thing where if you had a problem with another child, you and that other child had to duke it out. It just needed settling. But now, children are connected online 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this does have an impact, instead of just being that bully at school, now it's that bully that's got 8,000 friends on social media that are happy enough to bully along.
And it follows you everywhere you go. Again, it's like using that scenario that you mentioned there. That was your safe space. You could come home, you went in your front door, up to your bedroom, you were safe. You could get a break from it, you could get away from it. But now, because again, you've got this device that your whole life channels through, there's just no getting away from it. It seems like there's no safe space because this device is a permanent feature in your daily existence and in everything else that you do.
That raises a valid point. About 5.24 billion people daily use the internet. And that's a big number, social media backlash, we've seen it. Netflix made the documentary Don't with Cats, and that sort of showed the power of, this online backlash if you do a bad thing. And we've seen that both work in favour and against people, right? We've seen like hurricane victims that have made a social media post saying we've lost everything and they've been crowdfunded a new life, or at least some kind of compensation for what they've lost. Not necessarily a new life, that might be a bad way of putting it. But then on the flip side of that, we've seen people villainized that have Daniel Pretty as an example in the US, he stood up, he did a good thing, at least in my opinion, which is a controversial one, I guess. He stopped a crazed man on the New York subway, and he was subsequently arrested and charged with, I believe, manslaughter was the final charge. He'd otherwise done a good thing, but social media had portrayed him as a bad guy initially, and that, had to have led to pressure in the court system in the legal fight that gentleman faced.
I think it has to be said, though, that I think an element of that, again, has shifted over time, like we mentioned. It's evolved over time because you're right, where something's happened and there's like a public outcry on social media about something, and everybody's enraged, and the person eventually feels so much pressure that they feel they need to come forward and make some kind of public apology for what they said. And I just feel that especially recently, has almost moved to a point where, look, there's triggers for creating scale. How can we monetize that scale? I.e., clickbait, i.e., deliberately gaslighting on these platforms because actually it generates revenue. Actually, by getting people angry, by saying inflammatory things, by doing something that's provoking, yes, you'll still get a lot of hate, but you're also going to get a lot of interaction. And interaction, points make prizes, yeah. And points of interaction make prizes. And this is the thing that is being very much capitalized on across a lot of social media platforms, if not all of them. I think nowadays.
But that is coming at a cost, right? Like, you and I have some pretty deep conversations. It's the reason this podcast was willed into existence. Like, for me, transgenderism is quite a difficult topic as an older gentleman to really grasp. For me, I grew up in a generation where if somebody was trans, it was that person's a transvestite. It's a gentleman that likes wearing ladies' clothes in his bedroom. Right through now to a modern generation where people do have this soapbox of, thousands and millions of followers. And they are using it, as you say, in a clickbaity, ragey way. Like Dylan, I believe the influencer's called, that did some stuff with Bud Light. Got quite negative backlash against Bud Light, the
Yep,
internet
yep.
cancel culture, etc. applied. But now, 2 years on from that fiasco, that particular actor is back and making a documentary off the back of that fame 2 years ago and the ability to sell a story. How much of an impact is that having on younger people? Because I know I've discussed, and this isn't necessarily the transgender topic today, um, but but at what, like, at what point do we say this person has a soapbox that should be allowed and is a legitimate platform, and at what point does it maybe, push back against what a child would otherwise believe, right? Like, for me, sexuality and that choice to identify my sexuality was really a thing of coming of age, right? Like it is for many. You can say, like you and I were talking last week, you can confidently say, there's a memorable point in your time where you knew you were interested in ladies. That was a coming of age story for you, and that should otherwise be the case. And I think a lot of social media influence might have negative impact on younger people that are, in that stage of coming of age. But right through to a younger age, I see on social media 5-year-olds identifying as transgender. And I think if you're going to try and change your gender based on something you've seen online, then there should be some kind of guardrails in place. Which I know that statement in of itself directly contradicts my earlier thoughts regarding the British government and their dystopian internet access. But I think the two are not the same. I think actually keeping children safe on the internet from potentially harmful content and the Online Safety Bill or Online Safety Act are not the same thing.
How we classify harmful material online is, I suppose, a point of debate in itself because content doesn't necessarily need to be harmful on the surface as you would view it in any way, shape, or form. It's just how suggestive or manipulative is it? Does it install an idea that potentially, because I was going to move into the whole issue about kind of false information, and that false information always spreads faster than facts. And by the time false information is given a chance to grow into a bubble, people can easily fall into that bubble.
You and I have both worked with AI now for probably a few years.
Yeah,
And when it doubles down, right? Like, we've seen it argue its case in completely misleading facts. And like you say, our comprehension as adults, our understanding is, let's step back and just ask, is that real? Let's go fact check, let's go verify. But according to data, half of 8 to 17-year-olds are using AI tools in 2025. And that does leave you begging the question, how much that information is correct, how much of it is AI hallucinations, how much of it is managed, right? Like, the online safety bill is designed to keep children safe on the internet. Is ChatGTP restricted? Because that can double down and lie, right? We've seen that plenty of
yep.
times where it just doubles down.
They all hallucinate. Yep, they all hallucinate in one way, shape, or form because most AI systems are designed to just produce the most probable answer. Not necessarily the right one, but the most probable one, because it's all working on tensor strings and math. It doesn't really know about the answer it's telling you. It just knows that that's the most probable set of responses. But it's not accurate. So if you ask an impossible question, you'll likely get an answer, but a wrong one. In relation to social media, and this is a thing, 'cause you mentioned it earlier around, the fact that you can have troll bots galore all over the internet. Yeah. And the way technology is moving on and open source materials moving on as well. I know we spoke about it a little while ago where, people could go and get their own little virus kit and build their own viruses by dragging and dropping components into something and make their own virus. And how long is it before you can, I know you've been playing around with some AI components and things like agents, for instance. Yeah, imagine you can like just train a team of like bot bullies to go out and harass somebody online, and it's all AI driven. Um,
But the tools are
Again,
already there.
I know that's quite a probably
The tools are already there for
exactly
exactly
this is what I
what
mean.
you're
It's like
saying. You and I both have played around extensively with custom AIs that do need unique guardrails for our own scenarios. You combine that with something like a malicious piece of software. I'm not obviously going to mention malicious software by name here, but those malicious softwares already exist. There's things like mass emailers. There's things like as you say, right? If you can spin an agent up on something like a Raspberry Pi Zero, which we've seen a lot of AI agents come to life on, how long before we've got an army of Pi Zeros DDoSing McDonald's because some kid's burger order was wrong? Like, this is the world we're entering. We've both said it. It's Pandora's box unleashed, right? Like, this is the worst it's going to be as a tool, and really we're just now starting to understand it as humanity once it's already out of the box.
and also, and the thing about doubling down, interactions with AI, you find over time about how convincing it gets with its doubling down as well. It reinforces what it's saying and even tries to back it up with sometimes false facts. And the whole thing about manipulating people, I've said this time and time again, when the AI does, say, looking into the future and AI becomes sentient, it will be the best ever at manipulating us humans because it'll have access to the most data around us. And again, it knows exactly how it needs to frame an argument to win it. It's just imagine playing against somebody at chess, and that player can predict every move that you're going to make, and it knows every move you've made in the past. You're never winning that game of chess. That's a future super intelligent AI we're talking about. But already look at how easily AI can manipulate people, even on just the basic AI large language models that we have right now. And I say basic in the context of what will come later, because we're still a long way from what I would say is super intelligent or sentient AI, in my view. Some people might argue and say, no, we're already there, but I think we're still a long way off, to be honest. And I don't honestly think we'll end up with a super intelligent AI or even a sentient AI until we can. Quantum computing, I think, will lead us into a whole new realm when it comes to artificial intelligence. But I think a scary realm.
Do you remember the IBM Deep Blue machine?
First, it beat us at chess.
Correct. It was given the explicit intention of beating human players at chess, right? And it eventually cracked the idea. And then we've seen, even now for the memes, people on YouTube are doing things like GPT's agents playing chess.
The last turn, it did it not. It was AlphaGo, because
Hmm.
it beat the world champion at Go. And again, Go is, if chess is a complicated game, then Go is, you've heard this term batted about recently about 4D chess. Well, I think you could refer Go as being 4D chess on steroids. It's a much more complex game than chess is itself. So it's unbelievable. And of course, again, I always like to come back to movies. Of course, I grew up in an era when there was a particular film on the televisions starring a certain Matthew Broderick that incorporated AI and the game of chess. You'll remember what that was.
How wrong you are, sir.
Sorry for putting you on the spot, Zeph. It was War Games.
It was
Um,
war. I had war
it
games
was
in my
War
mind, but I was
Games.
like, I'm going to be
Yeah.
wrong here.
And
But
we'd basically handed over control of our nuclear arsenal to an AI, a super intelligent AI that was going to be super strategic and be able to defend. And basically, it took over, and we had to negotiate with this AI to stop it from basically ending the whole world. But our method for negotiation was by playing it at chess. But yeah, a really good movie. I suggest you
that brings
watch
us
it.
back round to a really great caveat point back round to our original sort of topic of
Sorry,
internet.
we went off on one of those rabbit hole slash
We
squirrel hole things.
did. This is probably going to get cut out and placed in another episode, or bloopers even for some of you lucky folks. But it gives us a good way background to how the internet does shape opinions and does shape futures, right? Like the algorithm. I always remember people telling me, "Oh, TikTok's got this great algorithm. TikTok understands me, and my TikTok feed's full of puppies, or my TikTok feed's full of cooking videos." And then I installed TikTok, and the initial algorithm must have just seen that I was male, and it was trying to throw scantily clad women at me, which really, for anybody that knows me, it's not really. I'm not necessarily identifying as something other, but I'm just at the same time I'm happy in a relationship, and I don't need to see half naked women on social media, but the algorithm's there, it's pushing it, and that is true of everything, right? Like you just mentioned the War Games reference. In that, the algorithm or the supercomputer, the evil computer, it's not necessarily an algorithm or an AI agent at that point in time, convinced children they were playing video games, right? That's the general plot twist. And uh, how easy are children manipulated by algorithms? We've got a large amount of children online watching live user generated content. So you and I grew up at a point where Watershed was a thing. It was like if there was a slight chance it was going to offend your church going down, then it was after 9 o'clock on the television when children were no longer in front of the television. All the people that didn't want to see the smutty things were no longer in front of the television. And it was otherwise quite well managed. You as a parent understood Watershed was a thing. You didn't want children in the room after 9 o'clock on certain shows, etc. But now that's unfiltered. It's user generated content. You and I work in this industry where anyone can be online at any given point talking about any random subject of their choosing to whoever tunes in. And the data suggests that that's as much as 67% of all children are watching live stream content on a daily basis.
And and you've seen plenty of instances of it, the moderation around these channels in relation to harmful material, harmful content is very, very lax. And it's super slow as well. It's not responsive enough. Once you've seen something, you've seen it. And generally, a lot of people have seen it. I remember one instance going way back a number of years where I've seen something on social media where I thought, oh, I'm reporting that because that's horrible. And Facebook eventually responded saying, this does not breach our content moderation policies. And I was in complete disbelief. And this is going back quite a few years. The sheer quantity of potentially harmful content that's out there these days and the number of platforms available is massive compared to what it was then. This is in the very, very earliest days of having a Facebook account, which was really only because I wanted to keep in touch with a few people that I'd been on a training course with. Was my only reason for ever creating the account in the first place. But yeah, it's if that's an example of how well some of this content is policed and moderated, then again, it is doing nothing but putting people in harm's way. And again, when you extend that out just a little bit, it's not even just children. Again, a lot of adults are vulnerable as well when it comes to emotional issues, mental health, etc., and some of the content that makes its way out there is just going to be harmful. And I know it seems I've focused a whole lot around the negatives about social media here. I'm not anti-social media. I think social media is fundamentally a good thing. But it's like everything else, cars. Cars get you places. Without cars, we'd be pretty much stuck in a lot of instances. But you can run somebody over and kill them with a car.
And I think that's a good place to sort of point towards the positives, right? There is things like the idea of the hive mind. The internet birthed the idea of the hive mind
We are
from
Borg.
Resistance is futile.
from things like Reddit, where instead of just one person's thoughts
Yeah.
or opinions and their friends group, you are putting it out to a wider audience, and the best of that advice is pushed up a list and prioritized and managed, and that can be a positive thing. You know, how many times have you bought a new computer, you've looked for a random odd question that's not on the manufacturer's website, but like 18 dudes on Reddit have already pulled them apart and you know what's what.
Yeah, there's a whole community springs up around products, platforms, even content, films, whatever you want. You're gonna find your groove online because you can, whereas it was before, it's if you had a bit of a niche interest, then depending on where you live, you might struggle to find like-minded people, and that's the thing. That's the gap that social media bridges. If people are so diverse and so unique in this world that they can't always find their people in the small corner of the world that they might live in. So social media, I suppose, does connect like-minded people across a much greater distance, whereas previously they wouldn't have ever been able to interact or connect with each other. So that is definitely a benefit overall. I think it's just that ability for people to connect and find people that have got similar talking points or similar viewpoints to themselves. Again, you wouldn't have been able to do that previously without social media.
And there is other really good use cases, right? I always refer back round to my old nan, and you and I, it's probably a rolling joke at this point about my old nan. And I remember being able to take my social media account to her and say, look, this is what the family is doing, this is the new child, this is the birthday that was celebrated, this is the holiday that so-and-so went on. And actually that, unlocked something that wasn't previously available to my elderly nan that was sat immobile at home. She wasn't able to go to those christenings or on that holiday to Spain or the like, but through the power of social media, it's, hey, look, here's this baby that was born 20 minutes ago.
I think
Or,
the real game changer there was probably digital cameras more than anything else, though, because how many times, if you can remember back prior to digital cameras, how many times you come back from a holiday with like 6 films and one of them like fell in the sand and it's ruined. One came back, it was all just black, or you find a few of them years later and you didn't get them developed. How many photographs did you lose out on? Because either they were difficult or there was limitations to it, and definitely
I
everybody
have
having
a perfect example of that. Ben Nevis, which I'm sure you are familiar with.
I don't think I know that guy. No,
It's a mountain range.
I know.
As a teenager, I climbed that, and when we peaked it or summited, I remember I packed my disposable camera at the bottom of a 125-litre backpack. And now, ain't no chance, after hiking up Ben Nevis, I was gonna dig through that backpack to get the camera out just for the sake of a picture, right? Because it was like, you were enjoying the moment. It was the thing we did. It wasn't about, quick, let's get a selfie, let's take the perfect picture. It was about enjoying the moment. But now, in retrospect, you're right. If I could have had this device that I'd have just pulled out my pocket and they're done, I had the picture preserved, it would have been great.
The social media aspect, what that's brought is the timeliness of it. As in, when you're at the top of Ben Nevis taking your photograph, instead of having to share it with your nan when you get back, you can share it instantly. Again, you've taken a picture. 2 minutes later, the world's got it. And it's right there. I know it sounds like I'm promoting Instagram here, but I'm really not.
The modern equivalent of a postcard, right? Do you remember as a younger person sending or receiving postcards?
That you used to get back off your holidays before the postcard actually got back.
But it was a pre-selected photo that somebody else had taken and then you put words to, right? And then you'd race it back home. And it is like you say, that instant access, as opposed to, okay, I've just climbed Ben Nevis, I've got to climb back down Ben Nevis, get back home, take the pictures to get processed, and then go take them to show my nan. I could climb Ben Nevis, take a picture, and then somebody that's sat in a local enough area to my nan in almost real time could just take that picture around and say, look, he was at the top 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. There is that almost instant access that we do enjoy. I've previously rehomed a dog. I occasionally get pictures through from that dog. That's great. That dog has social media. I get to see pictures of a dog. That wouldn't have happened in the 90s, and that is a positive of social media, I definitely have to say, where you can follow a dog and you can get updates on a dog. We live in the future if you can follow dog-based personalities on the internet and find that entertaining. That is the future that we dreamed of in the 80s, in the 90s. That instant communication, that always on, that access to the stupid question. How many times in the 90s did you listen to a song and then you're like, that was a really good song, and then it's just gone forever? You didn't know the name of that song, you never heard it again because it was one time playing in a club. Now that's not a thing anymore.
Because of that little magic box.
I guess this became a talk about a phone more than it did the internet as an overall thing, right? This is the conclusion of our internet chat, people. Phones are amazing.
Well, again, because when you think about social media is a platform, but by far the mobile phone is the enabler. All these platforms have sprung up, and the usability of them has increased so much because of mobile phones. Because again, if people could only go home and log into their PC for their social media, again, you'd see far less interaction in social media in general and far less uptake. But because it's in everybody's pocket, you're taking it with you everywhere you go, and it's so accessible, that's really what's kind of boosted the uptake and made it such a big thing. And like I say, when you drive around or you walk around these days, again, I'm not the kind of person that uses my mobile phone a lot when I'm out walking about, or unless I need to actually answer a call or make a call or do something. But the number of people you see walking around, and all their faces are fixed down at their phone as they're walking places. Here I'm coming back to one of the negatives again, but I think one of the negatives, and this will be, I promise this is the last negative I'm going to raise around social media, but I just think one of the potential negatives is it damages the kind of natural social interactions that would ordinarily take place. Even to the point of going out somewhere, and ordinarily, if somebody's in a slightly socially awkward situation where they don't know people and everybody's in the same boat there, somebody's going to break the ice, and eventually these people are going to end up talking and having a great time. But now in the same situation, people just turn to their phones and they'll talk to their pals online on their phone because the space they're in is full of people they don't know. And rather than breaking through that awkward social barrier of reaching out to a new person and making a new friend and speaking to somebody for the first time, it's easier just to look at your phone and speak to somebody you know because it's more comfortable and it's less threatening. So that's, I suppose, that's my last negative. It gets in the way of real social interactions sometimes happening.
I think I can take that negative, expand on it, but then also open that into a positive.
Go for it.
For me, I got in a relationship before the prevalence of social media based relationships. And I don't fully understand the swipe right, swipe left joke thing, but I know it's like a dating thing. And I would be terrified in a modern world to try and, interact with the opposite sex for a relationship. How can you do that? For me, it would be a case of, oh, do you then go to an app? Are you paying a subscription to find love? Is that company really then at that point invested in helping you find love if you're paying them exclusively to do so? And there's all these sort of negatives, but then on the back of that, there is a positive. You and I grew up at a time where going and meeting somebody at a pub was normal practice, or at a cafe, or at a social event, and that did genuinely put people at risk, right? Like, it was a thing pre-internet dating where women would show up somewhere and get spiked or potentially sexually exploited, whereas now, with that safety net that is online dating, you can say, okay, take away that profile picture and search for it on the internet. Has it been used by 38,000 people online for dating profiles, or is it, unique to this one person that's messaging me on social media, right? And And if it is unique, who is this person? Is this person somebody that's formally charged for crimes that would otherwise put you in a position where you wouldn't want to be in a room with that person alone? And we have this vast access to information that does offer that level of safety net where, I've definitely seen use cases where those protections didn't necessarily work, but for the majority, if you look at the overall number of crimes against both women and men in an otherwise vulnerable position of dating, romancy type scenarios, has reduced overall as a number. That's largely thanks to the ability of online dating.
That comes back to what I said earlier about the fact that a lot of people actually do feel that even though the online space is a much wider, much more diverse, much more potentially risky space, there's a lot more hazards out there than your physical locality, generally depending on where you are, but hopefully that's the case. But people feel safer in that space. They feel more protected in that space. And again, I think there's an element of that is anonymity. I think a lot of people do feel more confident online in general because they feel there's an element of that disconnection. And like you say, even when it comes to the relationship front, if there was somebody that's very socially awkward and they find themselves, they want to find a partner, they want to find somebody they can connect with, but they just can't get the courage up to actually go out to a pub and try and do it the hard way, in a space where you can just converse safely and quietly in a protected way, where you've got the full control to disconnect from that conversation when it's no longer comfortable for you. Yeah, absolutely, that is a benefit. There's a bit of protection, there's a bit of safety there.
I fully agree. I've from day dot that we first met, I've talked about the ability to keep yourself private online and have the ability to post this persona of, like you see in here today with Zeph and Thren. Zeph and Thren definitely didn't walk past you in the street at any given point. This is our choice at anonymity. But at what cost? Like we are feeding big data, our perceived anonymity online, whilst giving us this sense of security. We've seen the birth of big data and data brokerage and social experiments. When we're winding this back round to its very core dynamic of social media and its impact, the likes of Meta, when they were Facebook, conducted a study where they did remove positive or negative experiences from users' timelines. Those users were people like you and I as teenagers, where Facebook actively manipulated the likes of redacting all the positive information from a timeline or all the negative information from a timeline to see what kind of mental impact that had on people. We were the guinea pigs, and now, with AI tools, with large language models, with advanced data engines, and the reported 18,000 data points any one broker has on any one of us, it's really hard not to have our judgments and experiences guided almost by what big tech wants.
Well, so here's a question for you. It's kind of a two-part question. Say, with all of that in mind, the first part of the question is, should platforms be more heavily regulated? But then if the answer is yes, or I suppose either way, whatever the answer is, who should be regulating that? Because this comes back to a conversation we had around the other day, again, where companies have agendas, but so do governments. Again, who do you really trust to actually properly regulate if more regulation is required? Well, so what would be your answer to that two-part question?
I mean, we live in a world, you've seen hashing. Bitcoin. Bitcoin is otherwise solving a numerical equation across a network of people, right? At no given point is anybody seeing that full mathematical question. You're getting parts of it or hashing, as it's known, which there may be somebody watching this that doesn't understand Bitcoin. We will do a cryptocurrency show either before this to give you context, or we will do it after this one, and then you'll have to go and watch that one if you want the full context on Bitcoin hashing. But a similar system can be achieved, right? Where if everybody is, or folding at home is another good example, where if you use the network to validate the network, it could be done at device level, and it could be done in a safe, constructive way that allows you as an internet user to still have the perceived anonymity that you feel you have on a modern internet. Unless you're in Britain, then there's no perceived anonymity.
On that, I need to ask you, you mentioned Twitter earlier, And just with what you've mentioned there about that technology, am I right in thinking Jack Dorsey's currently working on some kind of communications device that uses Bluetooth meshing and stays off the main communications grid?
Yeah, so Jack Dorsey's developing something similar to the Mesh Core or Mesh-tastic networks, where it's
So it's based
peer-based.
on Bluetooth meshing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Bluetooth meshing on Node, and it's for anybody listening. The easiest way to understand when we talk about meshing is think about a Wi-Fi extender at your house. Let's pretend your Wi-Fi doesn't reach your upstairs back bedroom. You might put an extender in the way between that bedroom and your original internet source to further push that out. And that same kind of thing is meshing or node-based networking. That's similarly to what Jack Dorsey's doing. But there is currently available solutions that work quite well. Like I say, Mesh Core, Mesh-tastic, both work on an ESP32 board right the way up through to offerings from LilyGo with the TDEC Plus. Fantastic, but it's node dependent.
I just found it really interesting, of all people, that Jack Dorsey was investing heavily in one of these technologies.
It almost feels like his Oppenheimer moment, like his moment of regret for building what's now become the X AI engine or agent that growth.
Because it goes completely away from obviously what the mission of Twitter would have been. And then for this new initiative that he's pursuing, it just seems that it's just so far away from the original path. But I'm like yourself. I tuned out of Twitter a long time ago. I still have an account, but I rarely use it. But I rarely use any social media channels other than. And again, we should probably talk a little bit about video streaming platforms, because those are social media platforms in themselves. Just when we talk about social media, it's too easy to get fixated on the online chat and posting platforms rather than the video or other platforms in relation to the kind of stuff that comes out through even YouTube. I know you've talked about this before, but I very much believe that normal mainstream sources are just dying a death. I don't see that there's much of a future in traditional television as it stands at the moment, with streaming packages or even satellite dishes these days. It's like, does anybody still get a satellite dish installed?
You know, I don't even think satellite television is a thing anymore. I think it's all internet-based television services these days.
That's what I mean. It's like everything is shifting to an online space. Even, let's say, your previously mainstream services all seem to be making the shift. When it comes to YouTube, all your traditional media sources, even your newspaper sources, they've all got a channel on YouTube these days. They know the inevitable is coming, and they are starting to make that shift. So it just gets to the point where, how we manage and moderate and consume and identify where guardrails are needed and where they're not, becomes even more important as more of media and content shifts to these platforms.
Well, it's important to note, right, because you raise a very valid point here. There is a generational difference. The boomers, as an example, are more likely to be on Facebook as their primary platform. Over, say, Gen Alpha tend to gravitate towards the likes of TikTok or Snapchat. And a lot of people now are consuming digital mediums as their primary news source. Like, how many times in the last year have you yourself, Thren, or anybody else watching this show, actually turned on the news at the set time in the morning and caught up that way and seen that as your offering of news for the day? Unless you're driving a motor vehicle for a lengthy duration across the day, you're likely not listening to the radio either. Unfortunately, boils that demographic right down to teenagers and young people as the people more likely to be sat with time on their hands, not driving a vehicle or wanting to consume a conventional medium, but instead getting their news directly from sources like TikTok, like YouTube, like Instagram Reels, and this can be detrimental. How many times have we seen fake news spread and then a retraction that doesn't get the same attention? How many times have we seen viral stories like Bonnie Blue, inspiring young girls everywhere, proving that your dreams can come true as long as you're willing to have sexual intercourse with 1,000 men in a day?
I don't see it as a healthy message. I very much believe Bonnie Blue is the female equivalent of Andrew Tate, if you ask me, and my honest views.
And we could go exactly to that point, right? For every Bonnie Blue type figure there is for females. There is the Andrew Tates and the Tristan Tates of the world doing just as bad for young boys, right? We find that, as you were saying earlier about finding your space and finding your comfort zone, sometimes that can be in a negative way. If that's not guided correctly, you might find yourself in, an incel type space, or like the T app that was recently breached was, in essence, an unfiltered forum for women to badmouth men they'd dated. These kind of platforms are unhealthy, but they exist, and you can find yourself, how many girls in your school when you were between the ages of 11 and 16, relationships are rife, breakups are popular. How many of those young girls are gravitating towards like the T-app? How many of those young boys are gravitating to the likes of Andrew Tate? And what kind of impacts does that have long term, where you might find a temporary need for these kinds of spaces, but you get locked in, you build friends, right? Like you and I met through the rocket community. We both like rockets and spaceships. Thankfully, we've got enough to talk about that we talk past that, but a lot of the people in that community will only come in and talk rockets, spaceflight, and then log off, right? They get so focused, so fixated that it's like, those are my people. And that can have good or bad implications.
Like I said, a little while ago, this whole thing about actually capitalizing on the rage that you can invoke by saying things a certain way or portraying them a certain way online. Some people have just looked at that and gone, that's an opportunity which can be capitalized on. And that's exactly what they're doing. The majority of people online that say really, really inflammatory things, or really insightful things, or things that are just designed to get lots of clicks and lots of anger in their comments, quite often don't actually subscribe to or fully believe the things that they're saying. They're saying it purely because they know it gets a response. I'm going to turn this into a positive for just a moment. And again, you know me, I love tying things back to films. You know the movie Inglourious Bastards?
I do.
And the reason why he wants to mark all of their captives is because he asks every one of the Nazis that they capture, all the Nazi soldiers, are you going to take that uniform off after the war? And every time they say yes, they're like, that doesn't sit well with us because we want to be able to see our Nazis. We want to be able to look at you and know that you're a Nazi. So they end up all getting fairly brutal with it. Have you seen the film? Do you know the scene
I
I'm
have
referring
seen
to?
the movie, and it's quite a favourite of mine.
So yeah, and that's, I kind of agree with that sentiment to a degree. As in, if somebody feels a certain way about something, if somebody holds a particular view, I'd rather know it than not. And I suppose the good thing about echo chambers forming, or even when it's with a negative, it's like, yeah, at least I can look at that and go, do you know what, I know what you stand for, and I'm not interested, or actually that's something I'd like to be involved in. But you're right, again, it does, people are easily led. This isn't a political debate, but again, politics is kind of working the same way these days in lots of areas round the world. It's looking at, what do you fear the most? What really gets you angry? Let's use that as our message board. Let's use that to get you on side or to get more clicks. But, for government, it's more votes. We're using things that annoy people to capitalise and to actually get something out of that. And that's all wrong. You talked about why we started this podcast. This is a big part of it, is the fact that politics is dividing people too much. The same way social media can create divisions and does create divisions a lot. When I first came away from Twitter, I was kind of looking for a new social media space. It's like, where do I go? I don't know what to do. I know there's another few platforms around. And I went to one, and it's just like, okay, this is just the anti-Twitter. This is just all the same kind of toxicity and rhetoric and name-calling going on, but just from the other side of the fence. And it doesn't help the debate. Politics has become so polarised, and social media has played a huge part in that. But by the same token, again, everything, there's a benefit. Social media will also help bridge those divides. Here we are having this podcast show with a specific purpose of cutting past all the political nonsense, cutting out all the noise, and actually getting everybody together who's human, have a discussion about problems that actually face us on a day-to-day basis without letting politics get in the way of that. And again, social media does give you a good ability to drive that kind of initiative forward. If you didn't have it, how difficult would it be to change people's minds on any topic, to actually get a message out there and to get people to hear it. Social media does allow for all of that. So whether you're railing against something that you see to be bad, or the cause of that, again, is it good? Is it bad? You can't break it down to that. We couldn't do without social media today. It'd be like, let's uninvent the wheel. Let's go back to just like dragging things along the ground. Once you realise the benefits of it, technology, no matter how much the technology ends up being used in ways that you maybe didn't forecast or foresee, you can never really dial the clock back on it. Again, progress doesn't work that way. Once you've moved on to the next iteration, it's then the next. I'll shut up in just a moment, but I was just going to add in the aspect of AI again, because I do think that AI and how it will be used alongside social media platforms in the future, again, going back to answer the question that I asked you, I think that aspect of it does definitely need better governance and better controls around about it, especially the AI agent part of that, and how much bots can be used to interact with real people and influence them, because there's still an accountability problem there. Whilst they're passing all these laws to like hold people more accountable for like things they say online or things they do online or things they post online, where does accountability lie when it comes to AI generated content and automated bots that run away and do these things? I got into this discussion with AI 21 the other day when we were talking about accountability for things like full self-driving cars, for instance. It's still a bit of a prickly one.
I agree. I mean, especially as you say, full self-driving cars. Where does liability come in? If a self-driving car crashes into me and then runs away from the scene, who's liable? Especially if that's enrolled in some kind of robo-taxi program like Elon Musk envisions, where owners can just set their car into operating as part of a fleet mode. If that's a customer-owned vehicle and an AI crashes it, is that AI going to double down and take it on like a four-state police chase, or what are the implications? Who's charged in that instance, right? Is somebody at Tesla that wrote code chargeable? Is the engineer that was on duty that day observing it chargeable? Is Elon Musk indictable? Who pays for the damages? A Tesla's extremely hard to get even booked in for a replacement that is costly on parts. All of these things come in.
Whether it's full self-driving or even any platforms that incorporate an element of AI output, at the moment there's basic disclaimers around what things can do or what you might get out of something. Like any AI platform you go onto, AI may hallucinate, AI may get things wrong. Very, very basic disclaimer at the bottom. You don't have to even acknowledge that disclaimer for most of these platforms. But I do think the more it becomes a core part of where people get information and how information is passed through to other platforms, it'll get to a point where there's more a kind of opt-in disclaimer, as in you have to accept all these things and basically sign a waiver to say, I accept that all, and I'm never going to try and even hold this company accountable for anything because I accept that all this stuff, all this AI could be wrong. And
But then at that point, are we going down the line of Disney killing a lady at a restaurant and saying, well, actually, you did subscribe to our digital service one time? At what point does that become madness to opt in and agree to everything? Like, we've done it for years now as humans, right? You buy a new phone, yeah, especially, some of the more market-leading phones, and before you can even sign into it, you're agreeing to 26 pages you've skipped through. Like, how many people truly know that Apple isn't coming for your firstborn male? You're not sure you skipped through the 26 pages of legal jargon that you wanted to skip through in order to play with this new $1,000 plus phone that you've just purchased.
yeah, I know. Terms and conditions are usually fairly watertight when it comes to those things. But again, AI is brand new territory. You have to look at the mechanisms that we have in place at the moment and decide, actually, is that fit for purpose for the future? But I mean, just coming back to social media for a moment, because I suppose we should probably think about wrapping this episode up soon. Like, in relation to social media, I mean, I know there's no definitive answer. Is it good? Is it bad? There's benefits, there's harms, there's societal impact, there's huge benefits to be had longer term. But yeah, generally it does probably need some more thought in relation to like full adoption, full saturation, and full integration with AI platforms and how that can affect life going forward. But yeah, I definitely think that for all its ills, it's certainly not something that we could do without, and I still think it has more benefits than it does harms overall.
I think I have to agree, and that is the conclusion. That is a perfect place to leave it. It's like any tool we have. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. But so long as we're using it for more good than bad, the benefit outweighs the risk. Social media is a fantastic place. Like we've mentioned, a hive mind, a place to get information. How many times have you purchased a new product or looked at purchasing a new product and you've gone to social media to see honest reviews? You know, it is this important tool. It is the internet as a whole even, and social media inclusive in that, in its infancy, as it is now, is the first real tool of a type 1 civilization. And we're still very much trying to understand it. It's still very much a technology in its infancy as a whole, as the internet, that I guess we're still figuring it out. And we do just need to carefully manage how we go forward.
Yeah, we're going to need to blend this episode into a follow-up episode that we do. We intend to have many future discussions about Neuralink, for instance, and AI. And I'm not going to go into it now because we've been talking for long enough. But I'm going to say two things together. Social media directly through your Neuralink. And let's pick that discussion up another day.
Well, thank you for your time today, Thren.
Thank you, Zeph. It's been a good discussion. And thanks for everybody that's tuned in to watch. As usual, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Put some comments down below if you've got anything to comment on. And we'll see you on the next installment of Podcast for the Politically Homeless.
Bye-bye.
Bye.